Welcome to Watch Cozy. Get comfortable because we're about to get into some really fascinating historical material today.
We are.
We're focusing on trying to understand a pivotal figure by looking at their actions, their impact. The idea is to navigate all these different insights and, pull out what really matters, give you a richer understanding, hopefully without it being too overwhelming.
And the figure is Thomas Jefferson, a name that, well, pretty much everyone knows, right? Cornerstone of American history.
Oh, absolutely. His face is on money. You see statues, monuments. He's central to that whole story of the U.S.
He really is. Built on ideas, people leaving Europe, all of that.
But he's one of those figures, isn't he? You think you know him.
Right.
But as we'll explore, this person who seemed, almost universally admired for a long time, well, now there's a lot more scrutiny.
A lot more. Calls to take down statues, mainly because he was a slave owner.
And that's the core of it, isn't it? The contradiction.
It's stark. I mean, he wrote, "All men are created equal." Those famous words in the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
And yet he himself owned people, held them in bondage.
Including Sally Hemings.
Including Sally Hemings, yes. Had children with her, children he never freed. It's not just an inconsistency, it's like a fundamental tension right at the start of the nation.
And it doesn't stop there, does it? The complexities. He was all for a small federal government.
Limited presidential power.
But then as president himself, the Louisiana Purchase, for example, that hugely expanded presidential power.
That's a really critical point. What he actually did as president often seemed, well, quite different from his earlier political philosophy.
Right.
And the material suggests he was also really invested in his image, his legacy.
That story about wanting to die on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration?
Exactly. It almost sounds obsessive, doesn't it?
Right.
Shows how much he cared about how history would remember him.
Okay, so let's dig a bit into where he came from. This complex person, born in Virginia, right? Wealthy family, landowners.
English roots, yeah. And that privilege meant he got this incredible education.
Incredible how broad it was.
Languages, Latin, French, Greek, but also math, history, science, botany, music, even birding and architecture.
Wow. A true polymath, like you said earlier, and inventive, too.
Oh, yeah. Practical things, like a 5-sided bookend, apparently. Device for encoding messages.
A cipher device.
Seems like it. And a dual chair, an early swivel chair.
Yeah.
Just constantly tinkering, it seems.
And professionally, he became a lawyer.
Like John Adams, another key figure.
Yeah.
And their relationship, as the sources show, was really significant. Sometimes close friends, sometimes, well, pretty contentious.
And very different from Alexander Hamilton.
No, completely different philosophies there. Big-time clashes later on.
What about his personal beliefs? Religion?
Doesn't seem like traditional religion was central for him. He was much more influenced by the Enlightenment. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu.
Raising individual rights.
Exactly. Natural rights, freedom, happiness, wisdom, individualism, progress. Those were his touchstones. Science and education were hugely important to him.
You can even see it in his house, right? Monticello.
Absolutely. He designed it himself, drawing on classical architecture, Venetian villas. It reflects that whole Enlightenment mindset.
So how did all this lead him towards revolution? The sources point to British economic policies, taxes.
That was a big part of it, yeah. And his marriage, that brought him more wealth, more connection to the planter class, which also meant more connection to slavery, unfortunately.
He got involved in politics early on.
Became a representative in Virginia's legislature.
Yeah.
And started writing against British rule. That piece, a summary view of the rights of British America.
He was pushing for independence pretty early then.
Seems so. Arguing the colonies weren't really under Parliament's thumb from the get-go. He became known as this radical writer, rebellious, challenging the king, gained quite a bit of fame for it.
Which leads us straight to the Declaration of Independence.
His most famous act, probably.
He was only 33, tasked with writing it.
And did it incredibly quickly, 17 days.
17 days, that's amazing.
It really is. And it wasn't just saying we're leaving, it was a justification, a plea for foreign help, and this huge statement about human rights.
Yeah.
Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Powerful stuff.
And clearly drawing on those Enlightenment thinkers we mentioned.
Oh, absolutely. You see Locke's ideas about natural rights, Voltaire on separation of church and state. It's all in there.
What made this declaration different, though? Weren't there others before?
Well, yes, Scotland, the Netherlands.
Yeah.
But this happened after the Enlightenment really took hold, so it's infused with those specific ideas. And the whole concept of a democratic republic, That was pretty radical, pretty unprecedented at the time.
There's even a suggestion he might have been influenced by Xenophon, Cyrus the Great.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thread some sources mention. He admired Xenophon's book on Cyrus, so maybe some ideas about leadership or governance came from there too. It's hard to say for sure, but interesting.
It helps to remember what else was going on in the world then, right? This wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Not at all. You look around. Iran had Karim Khan Zand, known for justice. Greece was under Ottoman rule, culture suppressed. Italy was still fragmented, paper states, kingdoms, though Enlightenment ideas were starting to bubble up there too.
And the rest of Europe?
Mostly monarchies. Some rulers were called enlightened monarchs, but rights for ordinary people were still very limited. So yeah, the American experiment looked pretty revolutionary against that backdrop.
Jefferson seemed to get the weight of it all, the historical significance.
Definitely. He saw the Declaration as more than just a document for that moment. It was meant to lay out a vision.
And its impact lasted way beyond independence.
Hugely. Inspired movements globally. And Americans themselves keep coming back to it, don't they? Lincoln during the Civil War, Martin Luther King Jr. during civil rights.
It's amazing how people on totally different sides of arguments still invoke Jefferson.
It really is. Slavery, states' rights versus federal power, economic policy, you name it. Someone's probably used Jefferson to back up their point. Shows the power, maybe the ambiguity of his words.
Now, while the Constitution was being hammered out back home, Jefferson was where? France.
Yeah, he was the American ambassador to France. And he made quite an impression there, apparently.
Influenced by the French Revolution.
Both influenced by it and admired by the revolutionaries. Yeah. His own writing, the Declaration, influenced their declaration of the rights of man and of the citizen.
Did he support the French Revolution even when it got messy?
He did, yeah.
Wow.
Even during the Reign of Terror, he seemed to maintain his support, which shows how committed he was to those revolutionary ideals, maybe sometimes overlooking the darker sides.
Then he comes back to America, becomes Secretary of State under Washington, and that's when the big clashes with Hamilton really start.
Yeah, deep ideological divides. This is really the birth of partisan politics. Federalists versus the Democratic Republicans.
Okay, break down their visions for us. Jefferson versus Hamilton.
Sure. So Jefferson wanted closer ties to France, favored a small central government, more power to the states, saw America's future as primarily agricultural.
And Hamilton.
Almost the opposite.
Oh.
Closer ties to England, strong central government, push for industry and manufacturing, wanted a national bank.
Big differences. Did that spill into foreign policy too?
Absolutely. Like, should they stay neutral in the war between Britain and France? Huge disagreement there. Eventually, the differences were just too much, and Jefferson resigned as Secretary of State.
Then came 1796. The election after Washington stepped down.
Which was huge in itself. Washington leaving after 2 terms set that precedent.
And this election was the first real contested one. Adams versus Jefferson.
Exactly. First time you really see these organized parties going head-to-head. Federalists backing Adams, Democratic Republicans backing Jefferson.
Adams won, Jefferson became vice president, that old system.
Right. And as VP, not having a ton of official duties, he actually wrote a manual on Senate procedure.
Seriously? Is it still used?
Reportedly, yes, in some form. Speaks to his meticulous side, I guess, even in a less powerful role.
Okay, fast forward to the election of 1800. That one sounds like it was rough.
Oh, it was brutal. Really negative campaign, personal attacks, nasty caricatures.
What were they saying about Jefferson?
That he was a dangerous radical, too influenced by the French Revolution, anti-religious, fear-mongering stuff.
And his side?
They hit back, accusing Adams of wanting to be like a king, of suppressing freedoms. It was ugly.
And the result was a tie.
An unprecedented tie in the Electoral College between Jefferson and his own running mate, Aaron Burr. So the decision went to the House of Representatives.
Chaos.
Pretty much. Deadlock. Until, incredibly, Alexander Hamilton stepped in.
Hamilton. But he disagreed with Jefferson on almost everything.
He did. But he distrusted Burr even more. Saw him as unprincipled, dangerous. So he threw his support behind Jefferson.
Wow. That must have been a tough decision for Hamilton.
A huge, pivotal moment. And ultimately a fatal one for Hamilton, right? Led to that duel with Burr later on.
So Jefferson becomes president. But the election showed how fragile things were.
It really did. But crucially, there was a peaceful transfer of power, despite all the bitterness, a major test for the new democracy.
And Jefferson's first speech as president, the inaugural address, he tried to smooth things over.
He did. That famous line, "Every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle." We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists.
Trying to find common ground.
Exactly. Saying, look, we might disagree on details, but we share the same basic values. An attempt at unity.
So as president, 1801 to 1809, did he manage to implement that vision? Small government, low taxes, agrarian society?
Well, he tried. But reality kind of intervened, didn't it? He ran into those contradictions again.
Like with the military.
Right. He wanted a small military, but then you had the Barbary pirates attacking American ships, so you had to build up the Navy to deal with that. Practical needs versus ideology.
And the Amarto Act, trying to stay out of the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah. His attempt at neutrality by stopping trade with Britain and France. But it ended up hurting American merchants more than anything.
And ironically,
it actually pushed America toward more domestic manufacturing, more industrialization, the opposite of his agrarian dream.
and then the biggest one, maybe, the Louisiana Purchase, 1803.
Huge. Doubled the size of the country overnight.
Oh, wait, didn't he believe in limited presidential power? Where did the Constitution say he could just buy all that land?
It didn't, not explicitly. This is a classic example of Jefferson the pragmatist overriding Jefferson the theorist. He saw the opportunity. Napoleon needed money. America needed land for its farmers, for future growth.
So he just did it.
He did it. Argued it was necessary for the nation's future. A massive expansion of federal power justified by his vision of an agrarian republic needing space. A continental power now. Huge implications.
Another significant thing during his presidency, banning the importation of slaves in 1807.
Yes, abolishing the international slave trade. That was significant.
Seems like a step forward, right? Reflects growing anti-slavery feeling.
It did, though economic factors played a role too. Some southern states actually supported it because it increased the value of the slaves they already owned. But yeah, it was a step.
But it didn't touch domestic slavery.
Not at all. And that brings us back to the biggest paradox of all.
Yeah.
Jefferson himself.
The man who wrote about equality owned hundreds of people over his lifetime.
And unlike Washington, he didn't free the vast majority of them in his will. Only a few, mostly members of the Hemings family.
It's jarring. And some of his writings, they suggest he believed Black people were intellectually inferior.
He did write things like that, yes. Though sometimes he'd add a caveat, maybe it was due to their circumstances, lack of education. But the core belief seems to have been there.
And that view obviously looks terrible today.
It does, and it's a big reason why his reputation has taken such a hit, especially since the civil rights movement forced a harder look at these issues. It raises that whole difficult question, doesn't it? How do we judge historical figures by today's standards?
Yeah. Let's touch on his personal life a bit more. He got a lot of letters, right? From all over.
Oh, massive correspondence. Political figures, scientists, thinkers from Europe, America. Shows his stature on the world stage.
But his relationships, particularly with women, Sally Hemings comes up again.
It does, and it's impossible to ignore. The DNA evidence points strongly towards him fathering her children.
She was his wife's enslaved half-sister.
Yes, and the power dynamics there. It's deeply troubling. Can there even be consent in that situation? Slave owner and enslaved person? It raises huge ethical questions.
Are there defenses offered for his actions regarding slavery?
Some argue, well, the laws and his own debts made it difficult to free people, that maybe he treated his slaves relatively better than some others. But it doesn't really erase the fundamental wrong, does it?
It's telling what he wanted on his tombstone.
Very telling. He listed 3 things.
Author of the Declaration of Independence.
Author of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom.
And founder of the University of Virginia.
Right. Nothing about being president. Or vice president. Or Secretary of State.
He saw his legacy and ideas. Liberty, religious freedom, knowledge.
Seems like it. He valued those contributions above all else. Which, again, highlights the contradictions, because his life didn't always align with those lofty ideals he championed. It's the complexity of a person, isn't it? And the challenge of living up to your own words.
So after all this, what do we make of Jefferson? He's clearly foundational, hugely influential.
Immense influence, yes. Gave voice to core American ideals.
But deeply flawed by our standards today, and maybe even by the standards of the ideals he himself wrote about.
Absolutely. Those tensions we've talked about, liberty versus slavery, small government versus big actions, they haven't gone away, have they? They're still echoing in American society.
So it leaves you thinking, how do we deal with figures like this? How do you weigh the incredible achievements against the serious moral failings?
Does understanding the context excuse the actions? Or just explain them? Where's the line?
Yeah, definitely something to keep mulling over.